Webcam microphone up close. Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
See, but I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, crystals and fondle slab of choice, computers, internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information because seriously, they don't want you to just raise two sources whenever I try to prove out. It's not. If you expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to be sadly disappointed. Another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty old man, huh?
Really? You can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions? Eruptions, whatever.
Like Dave Powers kind of...
Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from Pima Region 2. Within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America, we bring you the Ochelli Effect.
Because I damn sure know I'm an original. We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for a 19-year-old girl to eventually get up to gumption to put these things out.
Hey, here we are. February 21st, 2015. The Ochelli Effect broadcasting live on UCY.TV radio. What a week. Anyway, it is Saturday night. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, whether you decide to go to the main website at ucy.tv/TOE or you're catching us later on downstream, excuse me, on the YouTube or whatever else, all that kind of good stuff. Tonight, it'll be, one of those regular sort of interviews where I talk to somebody of interest out there. Let's see. All right. And actually, an interesting guy who I listen to on occasion. He does something called the Higher Side Chats, as it were. Interesting to me because it's a whole lot more clever than the rather unoriginal name I gave to this broadcast. But I love it because the abbreviation works out to be THC. That's a beautiful thing right there. And of course, the Higher Side Chats also relates to something of historical value. The Roosevelt era. What do you call it? The fireside chats, right? So kind of gives you that sort of beckoning back to something of historical interest, plus the THC thing, plus, this guy is just a whole lot more clever than I am, I think. So definitely glad to have him on. I do believe I have him right now. Greg, are you with me?
Hey, what's happening, my man?
How's it going?
Never better.
So, look, I don't know how many of my listeners are familiar with what you do. I know I listen to it, but, then again, I jump around and listen to a lot of different podcasts and a lot of different stuff that's out there that is, not connected to the alphabet soup of the mainstream, as it were. Right. Not the Time Warner prescribed, mind control and brainwashing junk that is out there in general. Not the thing that I spend a lot of time on, although I do have to every once in a while take a look at it because... it's always good to see what your enemy's thinking.
Right.
So being a guy who's not exactly corporate controlled, as it were, and being somebody who's done this for a while, I'm not even exactly sure how long the Higher Side Chat has been around. Go ahead. Tell us a little about how it came to be. How about we start there?
Sure, man. Yeah, it's been around about 3 years. When I started it was going to be just a comedy show, and then it morphed into more of a conspiracy show, and I've been doing that ever since. But now, anything from UFOs, MKUltra, cryptozoology, false flag, secret societies, hidden history, occult magic, all that kind of stuff, corporate crimes, even the Hollow Earth theory, which is a favorite of mine. like anything on the fringe is what I like to explore, and we have a guest every episode. And largely, I consider my role to be remaining fairly neutral, but to help a guest make the best case for their position that I can. Sometimes that means playing the devil's advocate and saying, or people are going to have a problem with this, or people might have an issue with that. Or sometimes it's just helping them get through the material. I do a lot of research before starting an episode, so that's what I do. There's a lot of shows out there, but that's kind of my approach. Is I try to lead a guest to make the best possible case for whatever their subject matter is.
All right, and of course you are a comedian too. That's another thing. I'm kind of I love stand-up comedy, and I love the comedic form of expression as an art form. I know here we go with getting way too intellectual about something that people just enjoy, but it's one of those things. I've always appreciated the guys that really push the envelope, and dating back to and still with the appreciation for listening back to a guy like Lenny Bruce. I enjoyed that kind of stuff. I was a big Sam Kinison fan when he was alive.
Oh yeah.
Anybody who is pushing it and saying things that most people might think or might have some sort of inclination toward, but would not be all that quick to jump out and scream at the top of their lungs. Again, beckoning back to Sam, but Sam is one of those guys who is not held in the greatest reverence as a whole lot of other of these other intellectual type comedians out there. But I found a serious value in what he was doing. But it's just. But then again, coming from that weird angle again. Also, I mean, I've been kind of given a little bit of a criticism on occasion because I found a lot of comedians who are not exactly in my cultural sphere to be of great interest.
Right.
Like a lot of black comedians I appreciate. Even though their humor at certain points in time is extremely racially charged, a lot of people forget about Richard Pryor at this point.
Pryor's great,
but Pryor was is legendarily great for pushing the envelope regarding what was going on in society at the time.
Yeah,
and of course there's a big lack of that at this point, in my opinion. There's not that huge outspoken individual, and I mean in alternative media, we always love to look back at guys like Bill Hicks, a lot of alternative people that are on the milder side. Also appreciated people like George Carlin, and I'm not saying that I didn't appreciate either one. As a matter of fact, I absolutely did. But I loved the sort of intellectual gymnastics that these guys went through, not only making you laugh, but also inspiring thought that wasn't necessarily, part of the normal sort of discourse in society at the time,
Right.
And in one way or another, in a lot of cases, comedians can be the vanguard of social movements.
Absolutely. Yeah. And George Carlin was. I mean, he went to jail for his 7 dirty words that you can't say on TV. I mean, something that now seems ridiculous that someone would go to jail for that, especially in the age of the internet. But yeah, a guy who died just a few years ago, younger than my grandfather, actually went to jail for saying certain words on TV. Like, it seems pretty ridiculous. But I don't think that we're ever going to get to the point. Like you said, we're missing a voice now. There isn't that one guy who's just really taking up the mantle of a Bill Hicks or a George Carlin. And I don't think we're going to have that anymore because the internet has created so many opportunities. There's too many channels for people's attention to go to. It's not all in the same place as it was in the past. So I don't know that we'll ever get to the point where we have one guy again. I mean, Joe Rogan's pretty popular in the podcasting world, and he's kind of out there, but nothing like Bill Hicks or George Carlin. There's Doug Stanhope people talk about. They're big fans of him. Duncan Trussell's another one who has a lot of those kind of ideas, those kind of psychedelic overtones to his comedy. And I mean, there's great people out there, but the time of legends, because of the internet, I just think it's kind of over in a way.
Well, see, the landscape has certainly changed. The media changed. It's just like okay, let's take it back to Carlin really quickly. The fact that he got in trouble for that was part of his stand-up routine that was played on a radio station, which caused a whole huge uproar.
Yeah.
That's exactly where that whole thing came from. And then, of course, it actually did provoke the FCC to come out with these, with these standards. And one of the first standards was based on his comedy routine. That's pretty interesting in and of itself to me,
It is. It is. And it became a Supreme Court case, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, at one point it certainly did. And, and of course, Lenny Bruce was legendary for having been shut down all throughout the country for saying things that seem really, really tame by today's standards. In most cases, it was a big deal that he was, using certain language, and oh my God, it was so dirty. And I mean, in fact, to me, one of the saddest things to witness was, one of his last performances in San Francisco, where he's, standing there reading off his court transcripts about what exactly happened, and where was he busted of all places. The worst bust, most legendary bust was in New York City, but he was busted in a lot of cities. And again, this is a guy that before that time there wasn't a great many different avenues. I mean, a Lenny Bruce now would probably just simply get a podcast and have his fans fund it, and that would be the end of it.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? He wouldn't need a public venue, and hey, these are people that are paying directly for the product. They know exactly what they're getting, so that's the end of the story.
Right.
You know? But see, I don't think that there is no possibility for having one of these standout individuals who comes around and actually says, the big scary things that people are afraid to get at in society. It's just a matter of, will he actually get that immediate jolt from being that sort of hidden legendary thing that other people talk about? Because immediately, if you do anything in public nowadays, it hits YouTube inside of 5 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even thinking back to, like, say, the racial problems, that came up during, what was that guy from Seinfeld who went to a club and started
Michael Richards.
Michael Richards, very good. I couldn't remember his name off the top of my head, but the thing was, nowadays that would have been on YouTube in 5 minutes. It would have been gone in the news cycle in like a day. It wouldn't have become the huge controversy that it was, I don't think. And that would be the end of it.
Yeah, comedy's great, though. I mean, I wanted to be a comedian, but I've since gone just straight into podcasting because I just think, again, times are different, and the road for a comedian is not easy. And you mentioned Kinnison. I mean, I'd say Crazy and Genius are next door neighbors, and these people, they've got their demons, and they're always having to go on late at night, every Friday and Saturday night, and people are always encouraging them to get drunk and get wasted with them. So for Kinnison, that became like his thing, and he thought that people, according to other comedians who used to know the guy, he was having people shove drugs and alcohol in his face all the time, and that causes a certain type of depression because you want to get the acceptance of your fans, but at the same time, they're kind of killing you, and you kind of acknowledge that as well. And so it's kind of like, screw you guys. You guys are going to run me into the grave. And, it's just tough for comics. But in this day and age, I think, getting a podcast is way better because you're going to go out to the Comedy Store on a Friday, Saturday night to a room of 50 to 70 people. They're all wasted. You're going to go on for 5 minutes, try to get their attention. Who's going to remember your name? Like, who's going to scribble that down in their wasted state and go home and look you up online? It's just a tough road. And now if you just get a podcast, you have the links online, you're in forums, people are right there in front of you, and they can press play anytime they want. And I think that's just the way people are gonna go these days. I think it's great because we're cutting out the middleman, and comedy clubs are notorious for abusing their comics. They don't pay their comics, yet people are going to be entertained. So the internet, again, empowers people, and it cuts out that middleman. But I don't know.
See, but a double-edged sword, much like the music industry, because nowadays, of course, most of the major companies that handle this kind of stuff, that used to profit greatly off of the work of artists, can't. The profit margin's not the same. The material gets out there. You don't have to go to the record store to buy something in order to get the material anymore. The whole arc of economics regarding touring and everything else has changed. And right. I think comedians fall victim to this as well, because there was a time at which a big selling comedy album would help you along, you know. Nowadays, possibly if there was like a sample YouTube clip out there that people just, you know, picked up on and went viral, this might actually be able to fuel, you know, your tour and all that kind of stuff, but it's not the same set of economics anymore. You know, so it did change things, you know, in a way it gave the comedian greater access to the public, but at the same time kind of changed the business model. And I don't think that that realistically the business of either music or comedy have caught up to that, you know.
Right.
And nobody's really figured out exactly what to do with the podcast medium. I mean, I know that it's evolved quite a bit, but I mean, even doing what I'm doing and the work that I put into, you know, to my shows and things, it's almost impossible to get paid. You know what I mean?
I don't know about that. I think the way to do it is you just gotta go with the audience to host stream and nothing else in the middle. Don't get advertisers. Don't worry about the networks. I think if you do a little subscription-based thing, do your show for free and a subscription-based extra for the people who are big fans, and that is what I have done, and I could not be more happy. I couldn't believe that it would be going as well as it is, and I think that's the model. I think that's what people should do. Instead of asking audiences to buy things from unrelated companies like Alex Jones does or Joe Rogan does, or, you know, just asking for donations, which every other show is doing, which of course we need to get by, but instead offer them something extra for that donation. Instead of a donation, call it a subscription. And then you can start to generate your own income and get out from under the thumb of the corporate powers that have been keeping me down most of my life. And most people I know who have a 9-to-5 job they hate, you have a cap on how much you can make, and you really can't ever go above that. But if you have your own business online, which has only been possible for the last 10 or 15 years realistically, then the sky's the limit. And I think everybody should be doing it. The internet's not going anywhere, and it can empower every single person to have their own great reality. And it's not that hard. It really isn't.
See, it's funny you say that because that's like exactly the kind of thing I'm working on is if I have, you know, a steady sort of subscription base, what it is that I would, you know, basically I do my free show, but then on top of it, here's the extra stuff you can get if you help to support me. And it's, you know, stuff that's relatively low cost, but it's high value for somebody who's interested in the topics I've covered and things like that. I mean, that's the kind of thing I'm working on.
Yeah.
You know, excuse me, sorry.
No, you're cool, man. I think that's the key.
You know, so that's the kind of thing that's in development, but I think it's only been the past few years that this kind of stuff has become obvious, and I certainly don't want to be part of this, you know, whole, well, listen, you know, buy water filters from this particular type of manufacturer because you'll help support the show, or, you know, listen, I'm selling Valentine's candy this year because, no, you know, I'm not going to do that.
Right. And
you know,
I think everyone understands, like, I've obviously been consuming media my whole life, and I think people are pretty understanding of those kind of commercials to a certain point. You can't obviously go past that point and it gets ridiculous, but ads just don't work. Do ads work for you? Because when I'm on Google, I have programmed my mind to not look at the ad space. When I'm on Facebook, I've programmed my mind, don't look at the ad space. When I'm listening to commercials on a podcast, it's the same thing. Or if I'm on Hulu and commercials come up, it's like, oh, okay, zone out now. Like, I just don't think they work the way they used to work. Maybe I'm crazy, but if you can have a direct relationship with your audience, that's the perfect situation for both them and you. You don't waste their time with extra stuff, and you have an idea of what kind of income is going to be coming at you. Because every job I've had in the past, I feel like I'm not ever getting paid what I'm worth. And now it's what you're worth is directly determined by the product you put out. What I put out is what I'm worth, I guess, at least to a point. At least it seems a lot more fair than GameStop deciding to pay me something barely over the poverty line in San Diego. You know, and then you're stuck there for how many years? You know, I mean, God love them. All of our fathers probably worked jobs for decades, thankless jobs, and hated it. And they didn't have the opportunities we have on the internet. We owe it to ourselves to empower ourselves to get jobs that we enjoy, things we're passionate about, and only with those resources, only by reclaiming some resources, can we then start to change our society in the ways that I think it needs to be changed. Joe Rogan famously always says, isn't it funny that it's all the hippies who want to share everything that don't have anything? And, he's got a little bit of a point, but if we can turn the tide on that, gain some resources for the alternative media, for the alternative thinkers out there, and start to influence our culture for the positive, we can take it back in small ways.
Right. And see, I know this isn't even, and notice, this wasn't even like the discussion that we intended to have. But this is the kind of thing I like to do, is just have an organic kind of discussion with people and just sort of pick their brains a little bit and sort of do a vivisection of the type of work that they're doing out there, which is different from a dissection because, his stuff is still going on. So therefore we are actually, doing the work on a living entity as opposed to something that is dead. That is the difference between a vivisection and a dissection, by the way. Anyway, so let's explain, just in case, because I do know that some of the people that listen to my show are probably not fully aware of what it is you're doing. And I mean, when you say conspiracy, that could be a lot of things.
It can.
And with your work, I got to tell you, it's extremely diverse. I was really enjoying the Tracy Twyman episode, and actually replayed that in part again today because I was just reminding myself of what was going on there. See, I sit and I do stuff on some of the conspiracy stuff, but it's very standard. Like, I look into the JFK thing. I've, discussed MK Ultra. I've gone over RFK's assassination. From time to time I've discussed, basically I'm an assassination researcher, and I spent a lot of time on JFK. So I'm fairly knowledgeable on that subject. But it does give me a lens, and it does give me other views on other things. I mean, I've talked about current events like what's going on in the Middle East at this point and stuff like that. But yours have gone even further than the stuff that I usually do, because I touch on the esoteric on occasion. But you're all over the map with what would be considered esoteric or supernatural or whatever. But you started the Higher Side Chats, and I did make that reference earlier that this is sort of like a callback to the to Roosevelt's days of doing the Fireside Chats.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And of course, the abbreviation's great. I mean, my show abbreviates to the word TOE. Great. TOE, thanks. But totally unintentional, but, not nearly as clever as THC and, of course, the Higher Side Chats and, and all of that kind of good stuff. I mean, first thing is, no, really, I think it's, and always credit where credit is due. I mean, extremely clever, extremely concise, and I actually love it. I love just the name of it, which is what which caused me to have to look into it at first. I would have to say it was probably about 1.5 years ago that I actually decided to pick you out of the podcast stream, because there's so many out there, and I do hate it when I've spent time and I almost want to write to the creators of some of these podcasts and ask them for my time back because
Yes.
because they do some awful stuff. But you go even further. You go into the esoteric end. I mean, let's talk about the Twyman thing. I mean, is that, do you have a good recall on that one?
Yeah, a little bit. But thanks, man. Kind words, and I definitely do like to cast a wide net on these types of things. And I consider the show entertainment first. I consider myself a talent scout, really. I find good guests who have good positions. So that's how we're able to go into all these way seemingly different areas, but I bet most of them can be connected by just a dot or two. Tracy Twyman, she is awesome. She's very much into the idea of using magic and ritual and Ouija boards and communicating with spirits. And we talk largely about how it seems to be a prevailing theme amongst the elite on this planet and throughout history that they have some connection to something non-human in a spiritual sense, something multidimensional. In modern times, the culture of conspiracy seems to be morphing this more into aliens. But there's definitely a rich history there and a lot of rumors in modern times that this is going on. And Tracy in particular, her claim is that she is in contact with Baphomet himself from beyond the normal reality, and she's communicating with them, and she also communicates with Cain as well, and Cain, the biblical Cain. These are the entities that she says she's communicating with, the names that they've given her, and I think it's fascinating. I think you can extrapolate that if she's able to do this, I think powerful people in secret societies have been doing this for a long, long time. I think it might have even be what spawned the three major religions, the idea that these priesthoods used to be way more into like magic and ritual. You look at what a Freemasonic ritual looks like with the cloak and the robe and the hood, and it reminds me of priesthoods. So I don't know. I think there's a strong connection there. I think it's based on something that is more than just the broad idea of God. I think they're talking to multiple entities, perhaps, and that's largely what that episode was about.
Well, right, and that was really the fascinating part. And I'm not even saying that I necessarily subscribe to what she is saying,
Right.
but it is interesting because there have been for a long time, and on this show we talk about the elite and the control of the elite and this cabal of sorts.
Oh, yeah.
That is most certainly in charge of the policy making on this planet. Most easily seen through the corporate interests in society. But once you get beyond, the corporation and the paper trails, and you start talking about the connections of the super rich and these individuals that are connected also through secret societies and things like that, very little has been out there regarding, exactly what it is that brings them together. What is their motivation for doing this? What is their, what is the framework from which, these ideals come from?
Right.
And so, of course, this is a fascinating thing that I know you've touched on many, many times regarding the worldwide controllers, as it were. And,
Yeah.
and again, I'm being very careful not to necessarily put them into one particular box. There are people that absolutely think that, that every single thing on the planet revolves around Zionism, and that is all there is. There
Right.
are also individuals out there which are generally, more of the Christian, flavor, as it were, that think that everything is very much a satanic conspiracy.
Right.
And that's all there is to it. They won't listen to anything else, even though, most of the satanic panic that we endured in the 1980s was very much disproven and all of that kind of good stuff. They still point back to what was, originally played up in the mainstream media as a giant sort of nexus of individuals that were involved in every single facet of society that were devil worshippers of one type or another. I think that it's an oversimplification for something. And, just like Carlin did say, it's a big club and we're not in it, so we don't necessarily know all the rules,
Yes.
Now, again, not to put down what Tracy Twyman had to say, but I mean, it's very possible that she could be entirely correct, regarding, where this all comes from, the entities that, people are collectively in contact with. I don't, again, don't necessarily support it, but don't discount it either, because
Right.
it is something that is beyond my scope of knowledge. So, but I find your way of approaching this really interesting because, you've gone into areas that seem to be, or sort of at odds with each other, but at the same time, you do remain kind of neutral, which is something that I've tried to do on this show,
Yeah.
regarding people's views. But then again, some people just have, far-flung views that they have picked up from somewhere, and they seem to have just believed in something that was given to them as a narrative at some point, and they simply accept it, without even actually researching where the narrative came from, what it's actually based on. Sounds a lot like religion, doesn't it?
It does.
In and of itself, when you're talking about those who embrace certain conspiracy theories. So I do sort of edit away some of that on this show. But I do find it all extremely fascinating, and actually have tried to sort of go from, look, here's the solid sort of, more real world kind of standardized research, and tried to bridge, some of the esoteric ideas or some of the occult ideas into it. But honestly, you do it a lot more seamlessly than I do.
Oh, thanks. Too
And
kind.
because I'm still stuck on the whole, well, I require this evidence or that evidence in order to state that this is, fact and so on and so forth. And people
See-
still object to the things I say, oddly enough. Like, when we're talking about the current situation with, this whole ISIL narrative that's, going on the other side of the planet, in my estimation, it's one of those things that yet again is another creation of our intelligence community, which is another occult nexus of oddness also. When you look at very, very deeply into those who are in charge of the intelligence agencies across the planet, you'll notice that they have these odd sort of occult connections on occasion too, don't you?
Right. Yeah. Well, you mentioned wanting to have the evidence. I mean, we would all love to have the evidence, but in a lot of these cases, it's not going to happen. It's just off the table. So if the elite have done something wrong and they have completely covered up the evidence, and we have this basis where if only we have evidence, then can we act? Well, then that's going to go completely unpunished forever. So there's so many of those little things. And I look for patterns a little more than necessarily evidence for a specific thing. I mean, if you look across the board, nothing is going right. Almost everything in our society is broken. I mean, the police force, the military-industrial complex, education, medicine, corporations' powers, the amount of money they have, the wealth inequality in general. I mean, everything is messed up. And if it was only like half broken, you could then say that maybe the government was trying to work for us or something, but it's not. I mean, either our government is as effective as Helen Keller playing Halo, or they have another agenda altogether. I don't think they are at all working for us. And, they have to hide that from us. So you have to look throughout all of history, where areas where they may have lied, where's the power been concentrated, how have things moved, following false flags in wars, follow the money. Where has it gone? Take the interests of the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. Look where they've put their money. What institutions have been started with their money. Those aren't to be trusted. All this stuff, and you can extrapolate the big pharma. The whole industry is Rockefeller medicine. A lot of that, you can't trust that. And look at doctors. They used to sell us cigarettes before they got in trouble for it. And now they're pushing so many pharmaceuticals, and people just trust their doctor because they've got some degree. They got 2 letters and an initial before their name. That makes them an expert. But they're just salesmen. They're taking the corporations that are coming in with their sales reps, giving them some cushy benefit, some nice little bonus, and now you're on pharmaceutical X, Y, and Z, not because it's good or what you need, but just because they're paying the most money. And we go years with taking these things before we know if they're going to affect us or not. I have friends whose lives are permanently altered because they took medicine for acne in high school. And now their life is permanently altered in very negative ways. And, the corporations don't care. The doctors don't care. No one faces a consequence except the individual. And, I think if we're looking for evidence before we start to get critical, we're going to be looking for a long time. And a lot of people are going to be injured and killed and beaten down and put into poverty before we really get that evidence.
Well, yeah, and this is true. And, speaking back to the patterns again, and this is something I point out all the time, is that, if it was simply the pharmaceutical industry that was like this, then I would say, well, that's a corrupt entity and that's all there is to it. But it's not just that. It seems as though every single avenue for human activity in one way or another is sort of, under siege at this point in time. I mean, we have genetically modified organisms in our food. We have, big pharma pushing, vaccines, which appear to be pretty dangerous in my estimation, but let's leave the vaccine debate alone for a second. They're all the pharmaceutical drugs. The majority of them are dangerous or poisonous in one way or another, but yet these are the things that, we're told we require in order to sustain our lives. Right.
And I think vaccines are part of that. They're just another part of Big Pharma. If Big Pharma's drugs are suspect, well, vaccines fall under that. So I think that people who say that the debate is over, well, they're completely wrong because the CDC has been convicted. They've been guilty of crimes in the past, and they have whistleblowers who have come out and said that their data is fudged. So, I think that when we're talking about the problems with Big Pharma, vaccines is right in there.
Oh no, absolutely. So
Sorry
do
to
I.
cut you off, but I
No.
don't think it's like such a lot of people think it's a very polarizing issue, and I don't think it should be. I don't doubt the science of vaccines. I doubt the corporations involved.
Well, see, and it is a very polarizing issue, but it is a very relevant one because even, as we speak, they're discussing in Congress. There's a House resolution regarding, basically outlawing, the choice for parents not to vaccinate their children. This is going on as we speak. These are the politicians who seem to be selected as opposed to being elected. Oh, well, political corruption. It seems as though we don't have a voice there. Corporations are people, although they simply choke out competition and any sort of chance for, true growth in an economy whatsoever. The economy is stacked against the common man. That's right then and there. Our water is filled with fluoride, which to me doesn't seem to do anybody any good.
Right.
Not even taking care of your teeth. Matter of fact, it can promote fluoridosis and all this other stuff. And to be honest with you, when I look around, I don't see even in this country people's teeth getting any better from all this fluoride.
Right. Why don't they just put vitamins in the water? Something very uncontroversial.
Well, because that actually might do something. Never mind.
Right. It might be the one aspect of society that works for the people, but of course, none of them do, and that's why it's not a problem of inefficiency. They're very effective at what they want to do.
Well, see, that's the thing, and I always argue against people who say the government is too inept to pull all this stuff off. It seems as though, the only ineptitude that's there is, done on purpose,
Exactly.
in order to create an excuse as to why they wouldn't do something for the positive. And every single, program that appears to be positive, it's usually a sucker punch, Look over there while I hit you upside the head. That's all it ever seems to be, and it's not again just the governments. Although the corporations seem to have perfect control over our politicians, this is the reality of the situation. And for those trying to call in, just really quickly here, I will take calls in a little while.
Ooh.
Let's see, let's give it about another 20 minutes before I take phone calls, though, because I want to lay out a little more about what Greg does, because we've gotten sort of down some of these rabbit trails and we're sort of feeling each other out here on the air, and we've actually never had a regular conversation. We've only communicated electronically before, so you're hearing it as it happens. Anyway, so back to the subject matter at hand. I mean, it seems as though the air is quite a bit under attack, whether you want to look at it from, the point of being polluted by the corporate interests, or if you want to take a look right over your head and see that there are actual chemtrails. I mean, do you have a viewpoint on geoengineering/chemtrails?
Well, I mean, I'm not big on the chemtrails, and I try to find things that obviously it fits the mold. Chemtrails completely fit the mold of what the elite want to do, which is to generally just weaken us, whether it's financially or physically or mentally or spiritually, just completely want to screw us up. And chemtrails fit the mold for that. I'm not really big on the chemtrails thing, but here, the fact of the matter is there's so many poisons in our general culture that it's almost impossible to find the cause of some things. We know cancer is on the rise. We know autism is on the rise. Is it vaccines? Is it chemtrails? Is it fluoride? Is it fracking? Is it GMOs? We don't know. And the problem is that there's so many poisons in our general culture now that it's really hard to find exactly what the cause is going to be. Chemtrails definitely can be a part of that. Geoengineering as a whole, like weather modification, definitely seems like something we shouldn't be trying to do, but it seems like it's happened. It seems like we've done these things to, we've used this technology to covertly attack areas of the planet with earthquakes and tsunamis. It all fits the mold. I'm not necessarily sold, but I don't feel like I have to be. I know who the criminals are. And I guess some people might have debates on exactly which crimes are their worst, but it all fits the mold.
No, it absolutely does. And of course, right away, I got a question in the chat room about you don't doubt the science of vaccines. Well, I'm sure what you mean. Go ahead. Why don't you elaborate on that a little bit?
I actually did see that in the chat because I am looking at that, and the Hombres chick, I got to say, I did say that I don't doubt the science of vaccines because I don't necessarily think you have to. I think that if the debate is about the science of vaccines, a lot of people are going to miss the point, which is the corporations aren't trustworthy. So I think that's an easier debate to have. And the goal here is to reel back the agenda on vaccines, right? So I think the better approach, instead of arguing about the science, which I don't really know about, I'm not a scientist, but I do know that these corporations and the CDC can't be trusted. So let's approach them that way, and we might get more people to come along on our side, because right now the anti-vaxxers are getting pummeled in the media and in mainstream culture. I just see everybody who is pro-vaccinations is so aggressive against the other people. So I think what our side, and I am on the same side, that I'm not pro-vaccines, I think the best approach to get more people with us is to put the blame on the corporations, show their shadiness, rather than trying to debate the idea of vaccines working scientifically.
Well, right, because the core intent of these things early on seemed to be fairly scientifically sound, but once you get into the mass production of them and adding these preservatives and these other chemicals, which are adjuvants and all this other stuff, this is where it really gets extremely dangerous, in my estimation. This is why I don't trust them. And of course, right away, I don't trust them because they do come from a large corporation, which does not really care about the damage it does so long as the cost-benefit analysis pans out the right way. So, again, speaking personally, I'm not for vaccines either, as I've stated many times, anyway.
I'm going to go with nature. When it's a choice between a shady corporation that has been guilty of many crimes in the past versus nature, I'm just going to opt out. I'll be cool. I mean, I, of course, was vaccinated. I'm still alive. I'm still here. I'm relatively healthy, although I do have bad allergies, which I've heard a lot of people say the vaccines might compromise immune systems. And in that case, I could be compromised. But yeah, I'm probably not going to vaccinate my kids, although it is a very scary decision that I don't want to make. I don't have any plans to have kids soon, but I am not looking forward to that time and dealing with that, especially when social services can get involved. Apparently hospitals can get very aggressive, but maybe the first step is not having your kid in a hospital. So maybe I'll start there.
Yes, and I have been, in and out of this situation because I've got a 7-month-old, and who's my third child, and the other two were fully vaccinated according to the schedule at the time and all that, but I really did not know any better, to be honest with you. One of them is stricken with all sorts of allergies, which, again, I think the allergies have been, ramped up a lot because of the use of stuff like peanut oil and things like that in the vaccines. Notice we have tons and tons of kids now that have these peanut allergies, and other dairy allergies and things like that, because in a lot of cases these things were utilized, in the vaccines. And, look, if we just trust for a moment that the idea of injecting a small amount of something into your system causes your body to be able to fight it off, well, then maybe your body decides that the peanut oil is an enemy. I mean, I don't know. Again, I'm not a scientist, but it does seem to make a little bit of sense that it's something that would bear some study that they're not doing, or at least not admitting that they're doing, regarding exactly, how positive this stuff is. So I don't trust it because it hasn't been scientifically verified in my estimation that all of these wonderful new things and these combo vaccines and stuff are any good for anybody. Mm-hmm. But that's just me again. But okay, back to what it is you do, though.
Right.
Sorry, I
don't do much.
Well, but you do. You've got well over 100 episodes of this out there. And it's all interesting stuff, and especially, like I say, if you're very much into the idea of going into the esoteric end of the pool, as it were, I definitely would suggest that people check out the Higher Side Chats, which you can do at highersidechats.com, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
That's, because I'm very lazy with the browser anymore, so I do believe that was one of the places. I think I even put it in the post on the social media when I put it out. Nice. That you can go there and see Greg's work for yourself and judge for yourself. Let's go over a couple of typical things that I've decided to cover on the show and see where you stand on them personally. How's that?
Perfect.
What do you think of 9/11 in general?
Yeah, 9/11 I think is it's pretty easy to come down on the side that that is a false flag attack. And it seems like who was involved was probably Israel. And when we're looking back, it seems like there has been a lot of cases where the United States and Israel have worked together, and they put a lot of blame on, obviously, on Muslims. They put a lot of blame on Al-Qaeda, which is made up by the CIA. But there does seem to be a campaign to like really belittle these people, anyone who, and Islam in general. But then, okay, this is where it gets weird. People get very sensitive about Islam and talking about it. But when I look at them for the past however long, since 9/11, it seems like every major attack that has happened that has involved someone who's Islamic, it seems like there's a strong case to be made that it was a false flag. So I'm looking around like, where is the danger from Muslims? Where is it? Because it doesn't seem to be anywhere in my life, and it doesn't seem to be a threat to me. But yet, if you look on the back end and you trace these things back to either the United States, the military-industrial complex, and Israel, well, the United States is not doing so hot for me. I mean, you can't go to. I'm from St. Louis. You can't go back to that area. You know, the police in Ferguson are kind of going nuts, and that's not just there; it's everywhere. But like we talked about, education doesn't work, medicine doesn't work, inequality in terms of economics in this country is really bad. The housing market is screwed. The United States is doing a lot more to hurt my life than Islam. You know, I mean, Islam isn't really on my radar at all, except for the news media shoving it down our throats. So, yeah, right. 9/11, I think, was probably the first big bullet point in that campaign to make Muslims and Islam seem scary. I guess that's what I would say.
Well, it seems to me as though, you know, any sort of military power such as the American empire has become requires a great boogeyman, you know. And
Right.
After the fall of the Soviet Union, as it were, we required a new one. And they tried several times to sell this Islamic boogeyman, you know, over the years, and could not really get the job done until post 9/11. And post 9/11, in my estimation, was also a very good excuse to turn around and, you know, clamp down on all of the freedoms that we had way too much of in this country, apparently.
Right.
You know, and to make it much more excusable to have, you know, electronic surveillance run even more rampant right out in public than, you know, than any of us had ever known, even though the NSA was totally involved in that stuff long before we heard about it. You know, and believe me, way before the, you know, the words of Edward Snowden hit the, you know, internet, as it were. Okay. These guys are well involved in this stuff. And of course, yes, Israel is always seemingly involved in these things. Every time I talk to one of these intelligence guys, and I have spent time doing that, talking to, you know, people that claim to be former CIA, that claim to be former military intelligence, that, you know, still are in one way or another, or at least are on somebody's shelf waiting to be taken off of that shelf for something else. You know, these retired, put aside guys, or seemingly ejected from the agency guys, every time I talk to them, I do note that in almost every operation, they at some point mention, just sort of, you know, as just in passing, that there's always seemingly an Israeli, you know, contingent that gets involved at some point or another. I mean, you know, even talking to Frank Gregory Ford, who has been on my show several times and has talked about, you know, because you remember the whole weapons of mass destruction narrative that was put out there for the Iraq War.
Right.
You know, this guy tells us that essentially there were weapons of mass destruction there. They had to be gotten rid of, and has actually and ended up being renditioned out of the Iraqi theater. One of the only American intelligence operative to ever be renditioned out of a war zone and survive, by the way. But here's the thing. He tells us that he actually witnessed the removal of these weapons of mass destruction, knew where they came from, and, you know, and this, we're talking about VX rockets, not nuclear stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But there is a nuclear component that went on there also, if you get deep into the rabbit hole with him on it. But the whole thing is that all of this stuff seems to be like, you know, provoked by us, created by us, and our, you know, out of control intelligence complex which is, just as worldwide as anything else at this point in time, seems to be involved with all these things. And there's always an Israeli contingent on any of the significant events, as it were, even if it doesn't seem as though they completely belong there. Okay.
Even Charlie Hebdo,
There you go. There you go. Another instance. But 9/11, I mean, you definitely, as far as the official story goes, I mean, it's laughable.
Oh, totally. I mean, just the idea that the planes and the fires took down the 3 buildings that day, that alone is laughable. I mean, even if you aren't a conspiracy theorist, you have to look at that and question it. I mean, how can you not? And then to say that there was an official investigation and the people involved, they thought there was nothing fishy here. I mean, that's fishy. So then you have to go, okay, now what's getting covered up? So even if it was the fault of Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, at the very least, they got in there and did something to the buildings to make them free fall. And of course, I don't think that's what happened. I think clearly there was a much bigger thing at play. I don't even think that Al-Qaeda or ISIS is a real threat. I think there's a lot of evidence that that's CIA funded, and it's a CIA Mossad operation. And the real threat seems to be the United States and Israel, almost everywhere.
Yeah, isn't that the? But of course, that's like the flipped script. It's like, oh well, you're kooky because you see this pattern, but all over the place we see this pattern emerging. And like I've said about the ISIS thing that has developed, I mean, again, we have another situation where, like today, I saw a film clip go by that there were American weapons found in ISIS's possession. They claim, it's like you're kidding me. This is a surprise, right? Like we don't fund all of these guys, basically, in one way or another. Like both sides are not funded. Like it's not intentionally done to balkanize areas, to keep, certain pressures going, to keep, the greater war machine fed. And this is the really true purpose of what's going on. And the idea of, the Muslim threat to the world is really just yet another one of those divide and conquer strategies, as far as I'm concerned, just like the the revamping once again of the racial issue that you brought up with Ferguson. To me,
Yes.
That's one of those things where it's just like, well, let's just make sure we keep them at each other's throats just a little more, not only through the economic disparities that they believe they see between one another, which are really insignificant, but let's remind them that race is a good reason to want to get at each other's throats too, so they don't spend any time really looking at the greater manipulation and those that actually pull the strings here.
Yeah, you're so right. I think there's a total parallel between what was happening with that in Ferguson and what's going on in Europe with Islamophobia. And there are other podcasts, there are other conspiracy shows that are very popular that are really focused on this multiculturalism thing, but they aren't talking about it in the same way that you just mentioned as a divide and conquer technique, because that's what I think it is. Just like you, it is a tool that they're using, but I don't think it's as pervasive as something like chemtrails or fluoride or big pharma, because you have a choice to buy that. You have a choice to take that bait. I don't have to be offended if black people move in next door. The media can tell me that I should be afraid. They can stage an event that makes me think I should be afraid, but I don't have to take that bait. That's the illusion of fear. Whereas, something like fluoride, that's actually damaging my body. I can't really do much about that. The militarization of police, that's going to eventually be something you run up against, but that's not like a hypothetical. And the idea that you need to be afraid of black people or be afraid of Muslims, no. You need to be afraid of the people who have the resources to ruin your life, and that's the major corporations and basically any government in power. None of them can be trusted. I mean, maybe power does just corrupt, but it seems like everyone everywhere wants world peace for the most part. They want to just be left alone, and they don't want anything bad to happen to anyone else. But yet it always does. And we never fire these leaders. We never can. We just go about our lives. And if everyone just went about their business, I think we'd reach a natural equilibrium of peace. But, it's a mess.
Well, right. And And that's really what it comes down to, and that's why I try and stress this stuff all the time: is don't let them suck you into, the ridiculousness of having to debate all this stuff. It's really not about that. It's about the greater corporate control, their interests, and their manipulation of the population is merely a means to an end to keep the machine running, as it were.
Right.
Like the point of wars, post World War II especially. But you can dissect World War II at this point and see that was also a much for profit stage that went on, worldwide. But even this, alleged war on terror and everything else is nothing more than just another machine to keep fueling the other machines. It's the mechanism that's been erected to make sure that the military-industrial complex in this country remains quite profitable, and at the end of the day, what's going to grease the wheels but the human beings who are being misled, and that's why I also never blame the soldiers that get themselves involved in these things, because I believe that for the most part they're involved under the pretense of doing something positive for their neighbors, for their country, for their family, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I may lose a few. Sorry, I may lose a few people, but I disagree with that. I do hold them accountable. I think holding them accountable is the only way to really make change. I mean, one of my favorite Albert Einstein quotes isn't even about science. It's the pioneers of a warless world are the young men who refuse military service. I think that's fundamental. I think if you got duped and joined the military, I guess I feel kind of bad for you. You put your life in jeopardy for the profits of a few, but I think you have a responsibility to know what you're getting into. If you're going to go into war, that is a very serious situation, and you better do your research. But they don't do their research. They just want the money. They want the college credit. They want it's a welfare program for young men, is what it is. And or a free travel program. I know people who joined the military because they were bored and they didn't have any opportunities. Is that a reason to go kill people on the other side of the planet? I don't think so. And I think that obviously we're pushed very hard to support the troops. Stand up and clap if they're on their airplane with you. I don't agree with that. I think that we really do have to hold them accountable. These are private militia for people that are basically a mafia, the global elite. You work for them. You work for the global elite. You are their errand boy. I don't respect you. I'm sorry. I think that's something that we need to start pushing, maybe not quite as aggressively as I say it, but I've been thinking about it for quite some time. So I guess to me, I'm a little too close to the topic, but I think we're going to have to start making people, instead of them just getting blind respect for joining the military, I think we're going to have to be very critical of them. I think American Sniper is a great example. That movie set records. If there's anything that made me feel like there's not a great awakening taking place, it's the idea that American Sniper broke records and won awards. Like, can we show a little respect for the people on the other side of the planet? Maybe could we take the idea that Americans are just complete egotistical, selfish assholes? Could we maybe just reel that back just once and show respect for people who live in general poverty and are getting pummeled by our military? I don't know, just me, but I think that something's got to change there, because if we keep supporting the troops and respecting the troops and not criticizing the people, we criticize the war, but not the people who are actually firing the guns, I think that's a disconnect. I don't think we're going to make progress.
I just have a minor disagreement with you, because to me it's more like if somebody goes and beats somebody to death with a baseball bat, you're essentially blaming the bat when you're blaming the troops. That's what it comes down to.
I'm blaming the guy who's holding the weapon, and that is the troops.
Well, see, to me, the guy who's really holding the weapon is not the troops, because the troops are the weapon. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just a difference.
I would agree if we had a draft. It is a small disagreement, but if we had a draft and you had no choice, I would agree. But people are signing up, and the pioneers of a warless world will be the people who refuse. But, to each their own, man. I respect you.
I understand, and I encourage anybody not to join the military at this point in time.
Right.
And there was a point at which I was, not exactly awake, and I would have thought that it was a completely worthwhile venture and, a fair deal, as it were, and a completely honorable thing to do. But at this point in time, I would say that I wouldn't want to be a tool of the individual holding that bat, that proverbial bat, as it were. So, and I wouldn't want to encourage any of my children or anybody that I cared about, even in the least, to do so. So that's what it comes down to for me at this point. But either way, so, but 9/11, you definitely see it as basically the same thing I do. Of course, the question always comes up on my show, and I'm surprised I haven't seen it in the chat room yet, although I may have missed it. Usually they ask me, what does this guy think about the dancing Israelis? Afterwards. But you've sort of already said that that Mossad is involved when it comes to any sort of intelligence operation with the United States, and I sort of keyed on that even more. But I mean,
media can't be trusted.
No, absolutely not. But did you have any specific thoughts about those dancing Israelis afterwards?
Not really. I mean, where did we see dancing Israelis? The lens in which we saw it through isn't trustworthy. I mean, if anyone's seen the movie Wag the Dog, you can create a conflict out of anything. There may have been some people dancing, but I don't know. I didn't see it. I didn't really see it. And I think that there's a lot of manipulation and propaganda that goes into the way people think, and they could be victims of that. But if they aren't physically shooting someone, then I guess I don't really care. Dance all you want. I guess this might be controversial too, but I just recently got into a discussion about the idea of, there's a lot of people in America that the big struggle is with gay rights now. There are companies who've decided they aren't going to serve gay people, or they're coming out against gay people. And of course they're upset. And I think people should have a general right to do business with whoever they want. But if you're going to be exclusionary, I think there should be social ramifications for that. You should lose business just because it's a shitty thing to do. And as a culture, as a community, people should be more inclusive. Dancing Israelis. I don't know, man. I guess again, if they're not shooting people, dance all you want.
Well, the idea was that there was Israeli Mossad agents who were actually filming the attacks in New York City as they were happening, which means that they would obviously have previous knowledge, and thusly points the finger in that direction specifically.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, and that obviously would be evidence, one breadcrumb to suggest they were involved with 9/11. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about, but now I'm like, oh yeah, I get it.
Makes perfect sense, right? And I'll tell you what else. I see this entire, incursion into Iraq. I mean, the Iraq War, like I said, although there was this whole thing about, a failure of intelligence. I hate that term because, intelligence usually doesn't failure. Any failure seems to be something that is allowed to happen on purpose. You know what I mean? But going into Iraq in the first place, and now as that war has evolved, I mean, I see this as one of the keynotes of the great conspiracy of this century anyway, thus far. This is one of the things that goes on. Of course, we sort of covered that. What other major watershed events? Well, let's think here. I mean, what is your viewpoint? Well, everybody knows I got to get to this because I'm a JFK guy. But, I mean, how do you view the Kennedy assassination?
Yeah, clearly another major conspiracy. I think that one is also pretty cut and dry, at least in terms of the idea that it wasn't a lone gunman who killed our president. But then the question is, well, who did and for what reason? The two prevailing theories, I'd think, are mainly the idea that he was going to disclose UFOs or that he was doing something with the currency, that he was going to do some big thing with silver and the currency and issue maybe his own thing, get us off of the Federal Reserve. Those are the two prevailing theories. I think either one of them is something that could get a president killed. Not sure which one it was.
Well, see, the problem with the whole silver certificate thing, and I've spent an inordinate amount of time on this, so excuse me if I go through this really quickly, but the problem with the currency thing is people point to an executive order, which stipulates that people believe it stipulates that he's going to issue this constitutionally based money as opposed to the Federal Reserve notes, which is entirely not true. These U.S. notes and that entire mechanism pre-existed his administration by at least 50 years. A lot of people don't understand that. And also, if you actually read the executive order, it's an augmentation of an earlier one, which actually winds up turning over the issuance of those silver certificates to the Secretary of Treasury, which was C. Douglas Dillon at the time, who was certainly an establishment banker of sorts. Now, this going on is not the point that it should be. A lot of people make a lot out of it. The UFO stuff, a lot of that is based on fabricated documentation. Now, if you want to get into the fact that he was actually doing battle with the corporate interests and the Federal Reserve, that's true, but a lot of that very solid documentation has yet to surface. There was a lot of things going on regarding that. There was the oil depletion allowance, which was being changed, which would have really changed the futures of the oil companies and their relation to the government. There is also the problem that he was very much at odds with the intelligence community. He was pulling us out of Vietnam. Nobody wanted that to happen because we needed a new war to continue to feed the brushfire war system that we had basically established by going into Korea for no discernible value. And the whole thing that went on there regarding Vietnam and the decade-long adventure into that area would never have even occurred had he been allowed to live. If you take a look at the National Security Action Memorandum 263, in which case we would have been out of Vietnam by the end of calendar year 1965. Okay, that was immediately reversed, days after his death. Before his body was even in the ground, that policy was reversed by Lyndon Johnson. Okay, so the fact that he was ramping down, the Cold War surrogate warfare that was going on throughout the planet, the fact that he declined to invade Cuba, the fact that he was trying to get his, reins around the CIA, as it were, at the time. This is what I believe pretty much got him killed. Is that, we weren't going to have this major mechanism that we have today, this monster, this Frankenstein that we're dealing with, which winds up, backing things like the Mujahideen, which turns into Al-Qaeda. You know what I'm saying? And,
right, yeah. And that makes perfect sense, too. It's not quite as sexy as the other stories, but it makes perfect sense. And, the whole point is the only times bad things really happen is when you stand up to the machine versus the machine telling us that, the danger is all around us.
Well, I'll tell you that even Watergate was, the result of, and Richard Nixon not being a clean guy, and believe me, I'm not somebody who is one of these worshipers of John F. Kennedy, but, he wasn't an entirely clean individual. But the thing is that even a guy like Nixon was actually set up when he pushed back against Dick Helms there over at the CIA. He was set up by CIA guys who were fully well trained. One of them was even an instructor in a black bag job who couldn't pull off a third-rate burglary. You know what I'm saying? And if you take a really deep look at that stuff, they pretty much got Nixon out of the way, in my estimation, because there had been way too much decapitation of political leaders, in the previous decade, and it would have been a little too soon to not be obvious. So therefore they had to remove Nixon, and we wind up with, Warren Commissioner Gerald Ford winding up being the only president that was ever to serve in that office. It wasn't elected to be a vice president or a president. Thank you very much, Gerald Ford. But, and wasn't he just a wonderful guy? Moving forward, but taking a look at all this stuff, I mean, have you ever examined, say, the Iran-Contra situation and, CIA drug dealing and stuff like this, Gary Webb's work?
Yeah, it all fits the same mold. Rick Ross, he was Freeway Rick Ross is the drug dealer. People might know the name Rick Ross as the big fat rapper with the big beard. But that's a whole nother can of worms. The idea that the rappers take up the personalities and the names of drug dealers to make it seem sexy, to let black youth know that really that's the only path to success. And really the biggest drug pushers are the CIA, it seems. They're the ones who are bringing it in the country. The reason I bring up Freeway Rick Ross is he went to jail for dealing crack in L.A., but yet he says his source was the CIA. And he's very public about it. He's out there. He's out of jail now, and he's trying to go around and make the rounds to get his name back from the rapper because he's like, dude, I built a drug empire, love it or hate it. I went to jail. I made my name famous. This is my name. You can't go around building a public persona off of my name and off of my background. And I think he's got a good case there. But Yeah, it all fits the mold. They behind the scenes, they're dealing whatever they can, arms, drugs, whatever's going to make the money. Children, they have no bounds. They know no bounds. They have no morals. And meanwhile, if any person tries to get ahead by doing something unkosher, they're going to spend the rest of their lives in jail. But of course, the person cannot match the damage that these entities like the CIA can do. It's like I would say a parallel is welfare or illegal immigrants. They say, oh, well, the Mexicans and the welfare queens are the ones that are tanking the economy, not the trillions of dollars that we're spending in Iraq or in Afghanistan, not the billions of dollars in corporate tax breaks or corporate avoidance of paying taxes. That's the money that is damaging the nation. And again, obviously the drug dealing that's damaging the nation is coming from official channels, really.
Well, right. I mean, look, one doesn't have to use a huge stretch of the imagination. I don't know if you've ever read any of the work by like Doug Valentine, who did the Phoenix Program book, Strength of the Wolf, Strength of the Pack. You ever heard of those books?
No, unfamiliar.
All right. Well, he's been a guest on my show. Interesting writer, somebody who you might want to look into on this subject because he talks about the incestuous relationship between, the CIA, the DEA, the military, intelligence groups, so on and so forth. And I'll tell you what, I draw this very simple narrative for people to understand that drugs are a huge part of the equation because, okay, look at our current situation. Okay, we have a fairly, what they're calling an epidemic right now of, the pharmaceutically created opioids being, part of the addictive nature, part of the prevalent drug culture at this point in time. But notice heroin made a huge comeback, post 9/11. Coincidentally, our military is quite well positioned to help police and guard poppy fields, which it's been proven that they're doing, so on and so forth. Now, if we dial it back a little bit, in the 90s there, we didn't really have a great deal of long-term military incursions. So during that time, lo and behold, the street-level dealers became a whole lot, more sophisticated regarding their chemistry sets, and we had plenty of designer drugs on the streets, right? Okay, fine. In the 80s, we had the crack cocaine hitting the streets. And in the 70s, we had the powder cocaine. But, of course, these things kind of swim together very nicely when you take a look at the fact that we were all sorts of involved in these different adventures, late 70s and throughout the 80s, all sorts of involved in plenty of nice climates where you can grow the cocoa plant. In all throughout South America, all of this, the involvement of us backing death squads and things like this. And, if you think the only thing we got from South American and Central American countries was coffee, well, think again. Okay.
Right.
So, but coincidentally, when we were still quite well involved in Vietnam, what was the scourge on the streets at the time? Well, we had a heroin epidemic, didn't we? It was plenty fast and loose, landing all over the place. I mean, everybody's, checked out the, I forget his name exactly, but the guy they made the movie American Gangster after, and his whole, independent operation of bringing in, the bricks of heroin, from the Golden Triangle via the caskets and all that. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's a great movie.
And that's a great movie. Yeah, Denzel does a good job there. But the whole thing is, if you take a look at it and you watch exactly where these, post-Korean War, notice that it just has a perfect parallel to where we're involved in the world and the people that we're doing this dirty business with. It seems as though the end result is a plethora of drugs that are quite conducively grown to their particular habitats seem to land on the streets here in America. And this kind of thing is not done by some poor kid, in the inner city. He doesn't figure out how to import these things.
Right,
He's not going to get the raw materials. Like I said, during the 90s when we sort of had a little bit of a lull in our international, combat zones, as it were, we seem to have the designer drugs rise up. And I almost think the distribution of that knowledge might have been one of the things that was part of the equation as well. But, I'm a conspiracy theorist, right? Suddenly people figured out how to make ecstasy, even though, back in the 60s they were still playing around with something called sass. But, okay, fine.
Well, drugs is a huge umbrella, of course. And one aspect of it, of course, a huge aspect is making money for these people. But I think there might also be an aspect of staving off enlightenment, because I think psychedelics, the mushrooms, the marijuana, the acid, I think those things can be really life-changing in a positive way. Even ecstasy, I have to say, has been super positive in my life. Of course, crack cocaine I don't think is doing anybody any favors, and heroin surely isn't that great. But these people don't care. They just want to make the money. But I think the reason why some of these things are illegal, why certain things are channeled in there as illegal, when they're doing far less damage than pharmaceuticals, I think a part of it is because they break the programming. They wake you up from the illusion in a lot of ways. Effective. I mean, there's a lot of people who go years without ever really sitting down for a half hour and being like, what do I want out of my life? Where am I going? Am I being a good person? Like, am I progressing the way I want to? Are there dreams I'm not achieving? What should I be doing to work towards them? What areas of my life need to be improved, or what areas, do I need to stay away from? Where is the greatest source of my happiness, unhappiness? There's people, a lot of people, who go years without ever having that little conversation with themselves. But I don't know that many potheads who don't go down those roads. I don't know many people who go into mushrooms who haven't been down those roads. And I think that a big aspect of it is making us cogs in the machine and keeping us away from natural substances that are quite beneficial for us. And then, of course, also you can use making crack illegal and throwing it into the black community. You can obviously create a lot of havoc and chaos there, which they like to do too. So it's multifaceted. But I think the stats are pretty clear that pharmaceutical drugs are killing way more people than street drugs, and yet we're actually paying for those. Those people are making billions of dollars. Yet, if you're if you're in Missouri, you can't grow marijuana. Of course, here in California, I could, but yeah, it's kind of weird.
Well, and I'll tell you this, though. The only thing that I push back a little bit against is that, the mushrooms and the natural stuff is all great and everything. But even the introduction of that synthesized LSD, and that whole sort of false, I consider it like the false flag of drug culture that went on there regarding the dissemination of that stuff. I mean, that stuff all evolved from the intelligence agencies as well. They were experimenting with it long before it hit the streets, and I think that was sort of a backfire, or a bit of a backlash that they didn't quite expect, because although the synthesized stuff is always cut with strychnine and all this other wonderful stuff, so there's plenty of poisons to go around, but I think that was meant to cause chaos as well. And that was an intentional move again. But notice that every time there's one of these, drug waves that rips through the country, you can always find the back door as to where it came from. And it seems to be, ever since we created the CIA, which even according to its own charter is not supposed to operate on American soil, actually, it seems as though they're, always behind a lot of this stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
I think there is a strong argument about LSD in the 60s. And one of the main things people say is what they did is they took all the alternative thinkers and they basically just neutered them. They made them so they were all getting high and having orgies and free love in some tie-dye bus somewhere, instead of actually going out and creating the change that they wanted to see. And there's a valid argument for that, but psychedelics are such a foreign and personal experience and they're just a tool, really. With a hammer, I can build you a house or I can bash your head in. They are a tool, and I have to judge them basically just on how they've worked in my own life. And LSD has been relatively positive. I've only done it once, and it was a really positive experience. But again, maybe it was because I did it in a right setting. I was guarded against the potential problems, and it worked okay. But the larger effect is whether it's makes you think in a positive way or not. It definitely does have a subduing effect on people who might otherwise be out there in the streets creating change, or going out there. And, a lot of people say voting doesn't matter. And yes, we don't have a choice in a lot of ways, but there are some states that have radically different policies that are positive for their citizens because their people did vote. And yet you have these huge groups of young people that are just completely shut off, and they realize the system is corrupt, but by sitting at home, that doesn't fix the system. It just remains corrupt and nothing changes. I mean, that's essentially what they want. So you're right. It definitely has a subduing effect. It's definitely always introduced by the powers that be in some back channel way. But yet, I still think if you use it correctly, if you listen to some of the powerful people like Alan Watts, who I'm a big fan of, Terrence McKenna, I'm a big fan of, although some people think that he might have been compromised. Guys like Ram Dass. I think a lot of powerful people have gotten a lot of great insights, and I think a lot of also comedians have said that if we just got all of our world leaders to do mushrooms or drop acid right there, that would be world peace. And I've heard that many times, and I think it is a bit of a joke, but I think there is some truth there. I think even if LSD is synthesized, give it to all the world leaders and see if we don't get a little bit of change.
Well, I would definitely subscribe to the pay-per-view that somebody decided to lock Vladimir Putin into a room and give him LSD for a little while. I'll tell you that. So that would be awesome, especially if his roommate was, Barack Obama. But anyway, sorry. I find that imagery entertaining in my mind.
Amen.
So, all right, if anybody does want to call in, I will now take some calls. If you guys want to ask Greg some questions or whatever, please feel free to do so. I think that the LSD thing, though, was very well timed because they were preparing to decapitate the progressive thinkers in this country. I think that there was definitely a concerted effort to get rid of people like Malcolm X, like Martin Luther King Jr., like John F. Kennedy, who was saying some pretty outrageous things considering the establishment position he was in. If one looks back at some of the speeches, it was pretty weird. I mean, he was talking about cooperation with the great boogeyman of the time, which is the only thing that I find extremely relevant about the possibility of, the exploration of space and all that, is that he was looking to unify efforts, much like we have today with the space station, but he was going to go a lot further in the early days of the space program with them. And I think that was stopped. I don't think that was the key that, made them have to put a bullet in his head, but sort of the decapitation of the progressive movement, the destruction of, the Black Panther Party, the destruction of a whole lot of these, radicals and alleged radicals out there, the Chicago 8. I mean, a whole lot of guys out there that had a lot of interesting things to say, that were looking for change in the society. I think were very much silenced, first through murder, but then also through distraction and marginalization. And this was, a little bit too coincidental to be anything but a strategic move by the greater agents of control, in my estimation. Mm-hmm. But this has always been my argument, and hey, I guess I'm, a broken record when it comes to these things.
I don't disagree, man. I mean, it all fits the pattern.
See, and that's the thing, is I knew you'd appreciate that for the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And before we get too far away, and I run right the hell out of time, which I do quite often because I get lost in these conversations. Like I said before, you can find Greg's stuff at thehighersidechat.com, but you also have some other things out there. I wonder if you might want to talk about that really quick and tell people what a THC subscription does and all that too. I mean,
sure. I use a somewhat popular model that's been used before in the conspiracy world, where the first hour of my interview is free to everyone, and the second hour is a $5 subscription. So that's what THC Plus is. I think that is the best way to do podcasts. I think it's the only way that really works. It's the most streamlined. It gets the people what you want from people, and it gets. Hello?
Yeah, I just added a caller in, 314, but I was just going to let you finish. And
oh, no, it's cool. THC Plus is the subscriber model for the higher side chats.
So, 314, you're on the air.
Hey, this is Kyle from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm a big fan of THC, and I'm really enjoying this conversation you guys are having tonight. I think there's a lot of hard truth being spoken and a lot of really difficult topics being explored. But I wanted to bring up one case of someone that Greg has interviewed on THC, and that would be Michael Rupert, who created the movie Collapse and later went on to commit suicide pretty shortly after doing the THC episode. And it's about the topic of, can exploring this get so dark that your worldview becomes doom and gloom and it can't possibly get better? Or do you believe that speaking truth actually has the ability to change reality and we could fix this from where we are? Or are we doomed? What are your thoughts?
Well, Greg, I'll let you address that first, then I got something to say about Mike Rupert. So,
For sure. Yeah, Kyle's the man. I know him well. I think the key to that is comedy. Comedy is an amazing vessel for truth. And if you have it in that vessel, I think you can guard yourself against some of this. I think what people need to do is look at the conspiracies that are out there versus the ones that really are affecting them in their own life. And I think they'll find that they're a little more disconnected to some of these things than they think they are. And, I guess it can definitely get scary. I mean, you're right. Michael Rupert, I asked him on the air several times during the interview. I said, man, we've talked about a lot of negative things, and I get it. Things are bad. But is there any hope out there? And several times he said no. And it sounded really down, really depressing. He basically said at one point something to the effect of, now is the time that a warrior accepts failure, and there is freedom in accepting the loss. And that's obviously very depressing to think that we can't win. And then shortly later, he did commit suicide. Some people think that there's this conspiracy involved there, but I think that his sphere of influence was definitely waning. So I don't know if it was the prime opportunity to knock off Michael Rupert. And I think it fit really well with the tone of our conversation. So I don't think there's any foul play there. But yeah, it can get dark if you aren't careful. I think that it's an important point. And by wrapping it up in comedy, I think you can cut to some truth in bold ways and still keep your wits about you.
well, right. And yeah, let me just first say that, yeah, as far as I understand, and I've even tried to talk to people that were a little closer to that situation, to find out, because that was my first sort of knee-jerk reaction, is that something had happened to him. But it does appear as though, first of all, there was something going on medically with him that definitely skewed his view of what his own personal future was, and it seems as though he did actually take his own life. He wasn't murdered or anything like that, as far as I can discern at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But Mike did have a rather dark view of a lot of things. He was even part of like this. I forget what it was called, but like this sort of round table of guys that saw a dark future on the History Channel or whatever. One of those corporate entities out there had him as, one of these dark future guys, discussing the upcoming economic collapse and the dark days ahead of us and all that kind of stuff. And he really did seem very much locked into that. And personally, I decompress myself with cartoons. I've said this several times, that I spend a lot of time watching cartoons, and nobody likes my sub-references to these things. But that's, that in a lot of cases is my sort of comedy relief, as it were. And I do appreciate stand-up comedians and, a lot of like classic comedians at this point. I mean, I occasionally will rip out like a Red Fox recording, because I loved Red Fox. And I'll get to talk about Red Fox a little more on a future show, because I'm going to have John Barber back, I think, next week. And we're going to talk about Red Fox a little bit. But,
Nice.
because the thing is, I don't know if you know who John Barber is, but he's the guy who created Real People, and also did the Garrison tapes, which is a documentary about Jim Garrison and the JFK thing. But he was also an actor. I mean, he's even, in recent years, he did a guest spot on Breaking Bad, and he's been on a lot of other TV shows. So, I mean, he's a cool guy, and, definitely somebody that, I always wind up talking a little JFK about, but we usually get into some different little Hollywood stories and things about the, the television world in the 70s, and et cetera, et cetera. So, kind of a fun thing to do. And from time to time, I get into this kind of stuff too, because if I only focus on the doom, the gloom, the conspiracy, the people that are out to get us all, I mean, I think that it would become an extremely depressing sort of state. And, look, if you surround yourself with nothing but the most vile and dark things in the world, after a while, the sunlight has trouble getting through. And, if you don't take a little bit of time to laugh once in a while at yourself, at a cartoon, at a comedian, at something, it,
Yeah.
it can become overwhelming. So, yeah, hell yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said there.
One other point about doom and gloom and the way you can approach this stuff. Let's take the THC approach, my show's approach, versus someone like Alex Jones. Of course, there's many, many differences. We're basically polar opposites in our approach. But I think take something like magic or occult rituals. You'll find a lot of shows where it's constantly bombarded about how the elite are using this and it's super satanic and it's super dark and there's human sacrifice, child sacrifice, all kinds of strange, insane stuff going on. And that very well may be the case. And I do those shows. But I also do shows, and this is the key, where it's like, okay, well, if magic is a real thing, if it's a real tool that's been suppressed and its use is basically reserved for secret societies and people in the know, if it's a real tool, how can we use it? How can I use it? Instead of just hearing about all these negative applications by the elite, what's different about how we could look at it? And I've done shows about financial sorcery, about sex magic, about meditation, about invocation, divination, and how these things are just tools and basically allow people who are magicians or sorcerers to give the details on how people can use it in their own life. So I think there's a little bit of a difference there. And I think that's a component that's important. And an important component is looking at yourself and your own life and how you can better it and empower yourself instead of just looking at what other people are doing, because they don't really care what you're doing. They're out getting theirs. And to some extent, you should start trying to get yours as well in a positive way and using some of these tools for those reasons, perhaps.
Well, absolutely. And also, the Higher Side Chats is not just available at the website, but you can get it through iTunes. Where else can you get it?
Oh, iTunes, Stitcher. We're on the Art Bell's Dark Matter Network. We're on a couple other networks. Basically anywhere you listen to podcasts. But if you really can't find it, thehighersidechats.com, or I also put them all up on YouTube. It's pretty easy to find. But yeah, I hope people enjoy it. I like to give people a lot of room to talk. It's also one of the very few shows that is edited. So if there are problems, if there are technical glitches or snafus or connection problems, I edit that all out, and it's very streamlined. I try to get right to the guest as quickly as I can, dive right down to the depths of a certain topic, and it's a lot of fun. So I think anybody who appreciates this type of material, this type of show, would like it.
Well, and what's interesting to me is that if for nothing else, let's just say that you sort of toss aside the ideas of alien entities or the use of magic or all these kind of things, and you just think that that's sort of a ridiculous waste of time. To me, it's an interesting study in the psychology of many others, because here's the thing: if you don't believe it, it doesn't necessarily mean that others don't, and it might not be dictating their actions, their way of being, their culture, as it were. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I always, like I've said several times, even though I've had more than one very devout Christian on my program, I'm not a Christian of any type.
God, no.
But I discuss with them their faith and what it means, because this is one of the things that does dictate a lot of people's behaviors, is their interpretation of, for me, what is just basically an allegorical entry into an allegorical sort of interpretation of rather ancient sun god ideas, in my opinion. But that's my opinion. A lot of people take it as literal truth and all that stuff. And just for the record, by the way, I did not hang up on Kyle. He hung up. So, but if anybody else does want to join in, we do have plenty of time. And that's 718-717-8296. And we'll field whatever. As usual, I don't screen anybody or restrain anybody. So
I love callers. I love calls. I don't get a
want.
Chance to do this very often.
There you go. And thanks to Kyle for calling in. I hope you're still listening. But so Let me ask you this, though. I mean, you're a comedian, and this stuff fascinates you, and I get that. I mean, I was a musician, and then I spent time researching this sort of, researching first the Kennedy assassination, but then many other things, on the side. And I used to think that it was sort of a fringe, kooky idea to believe that there was, a control system over the planet any bigger than the things that I had been taught about in civics class. But gee, the more time went on and the more patterns I saw and the more evidence that became accessible to me, the more I saw that, I needed to apologize to those that told me about what has been identified, at least since the 60s, as conspiracy theory. I needed to apologize to them many, many times because that sort of, and that's also a negative thing that doesn't need to be negative at all. The idea of conspiracy, one of the most often prosecuted things, in law at all is a conspiracy. Conspiracy charges are, rather mundane sort of in jurisprudence, and theory is not a dirty word, although most of us that talk about this kind of stuff are not talking about theories exactly, if you understand the meaning of the word.
Right.
We're really talking about, different paths of evidence that may not necessarily be complete, so they may not be, rock solid cases against the individuals that we're talking about, but at the same time, they're a whole lot more than just a circumstantial machination of the mind. And circumstantial, by the way, is also a way of forming evidence as well, which is pretty much what you're talking about here when you're talking about patterns. If you take a look at the circumstances and the occurrences of things, you can note that there are certain patterns, which again seem to implicate that there is an intelligent sort of strategy behind a lot of things. Not too much seems to happen by coincidence. You know what I'm saying? So,
Oh, of course.
but I do love the way that you go through this stuff, and but what is it that caused you to really want to go into this area? Because you probably could have done, a show based on, God, I don't know, it just you could have written comedy skits and tried to distribute that,
Right. And that is how it started. And it wasn't until I was several episodes in, and it was mushrooms. It was literally, I was doing a show, and we decided to do mushrooms on the air because it coincided with a major comedian. His name's Ari Shafir. He started something called Shroom Fest. We converged at this condo in San Diego. We were all on mushrooms, and the message I was just getting was like, man, this isn't the path. This is not the crew you're going to be running with. You need to do something else. And it really was that I was like, these aren't the footsteps I want to follow. And I would rather create the conspiracy show that I want to listen to, because at the time it didn't really exist. I kind of liked Coast to Coast, but I thought they were way too mild and Christian slanted. I kind of liked Red Ice, but I had some issues there. I didn't really like Alex Jones. I just listened because there just wasn't anything else. So I wanted to create a certain type of show that I felt like wasn't really there. And so that's what I went for. And it was the mushrooms that really took me in that direction versus being just another comedy show, another group of guys sitting around and smoking weed and bullshitting about what's in the media. I felt like there was no value in that. And it was really the internal voice that I would say was awakened by the mushroom, or was the mushroom itself, depending on how weird you want to get. That's kind of what woke me up. And I think what you were saying about people getting obsessed with these things and distracted is so true. Not only can you get into a really negative headspace, but you can be spinning your wheels and not advance your own life. I think there's not enough emphasis put on people becoming great people. Be better. Take the warrior's path. A lot of people talk about, but it's like, is chemtrails the worst thing in your life, or is it your shitty job at AT&T? Is sex rituals of the elite really getting you down, or is it your student loans you need to take care of? I mean, it's just like, is it fluoride or is it laziness? Come on. I think that in a lot of cases, people are looking for a reason to say why their life isn't what they want. And a lot of times it's easy to put the blame on the external forces, which are there, but have you really done everything in your power to manifest the reality you want to live. And a lot of people, if they're being honest, they haven't. And that's where they should start.
Mm. No, definitely, and that's the thing. Although I gotta say that when one starts to remove certain things from their lives that they think are staples, I mean, like if you cut down on, because I have not found it possible to completely remove genetically modified organisms and all this sort of fake food from my life. I can't remove it all, but I have tried to reduce it a lot. I do feel a lot better. So when you change, when you change your behaviors and you change what your body is taking in, you are what you eat, you are what you consume, you are what you drink. I try to avoid the fluoride as best I can, and all that stuff, although I still do smoke.
See, well, that's it right there, man. You got to knock that off. You talking about cigarettes?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's the devil's breath right there, my man.
I know. Cigarettes plus, but...
like, how can you be concerned about chemtrails or GMOs when you're literally smoking poison on a daily basis? I mean, you got to get the basics down first, man.
Well,
my girlfriend, I'm passionate because my girlfriend smokes too. She's working on it, but it's...
Well, I'm a work in progress, brother. What can I say?
We all are. We all are, man. We are all trying to sculpt something out of this mess of clay that we got. But then again, is it GMOs or is it the lack of exercise? Cutting GMOs out is great, but you got to cut cigarettes out.
No, you're exactly right. And of course, I've also noted that the less TV that people watch, the better they feel.
Yes.
there's a lot of things you can get rid of. Again, still qualifying that by saying yes, I still watch my cartoons. I love cartoons. I'm like a Family Guy, Simpsons, Futurama, South Park kind of guy. I go across that whole gambit of, somewhat adult and fairly, newer type cartoons. I mean, I don't get me wrong, I love Tom and Jerry and stuff like that too, but it doesn't exactly soothe me in the same way intellectually that these other things do. And but look, when you spend a week studying the national security state and you take a look at the MK Ultra program and exactly where this stuff leads to, and have you ever studied MK Ultra in general?
Yeah, MK Ultra is definitely a major, obviously a lot of people will debate on if it's continued or if the project was really decommissioned. But I think if you think it hasn't continued, you're kidding yourself. Obviously, MK Ultra is a big umbrella too. It's like saying drugs. I mean, the ideas under that umbrella are pretty different. Some people think it goes into Project Monarch, mind-controlled sex slave programming that goes into pop stars. Oh, that's why Miley Cyrus might be going so crazy right now as she's acting out from all these ritual rapes that might have happened on her way to the top. Who knows? There's a lot of speculation in that area. But MK Ultra, definitely, if you can go into the direction of just marketing in general, how they fused marketing with mind controls and subliminal messaging. I think that
the Mockingbird programs, the control of the media and all that stuff. I mean, that is clearly a reality.
Very vast.
That's not a conspiracy theory. And you take a look at the streamlining of the corporations now with the entities that actually provide the alleged news to the alleged population, right? So not as though, so it is a huge umbrella, but I was just wondering how you looked at that one too. I mean, and at the same time, it winds up leading into discussions about stuff like, I had a survivor from Jonestown on this show, gonna have another one soon, by the way. Going to have H.P. Albarelli on at some point to discuss, Frank Olson, all that kind of thing. I mean, believe me, all of this stuff to me is valid, and the history is rather valid because it shows us the blueprints by which things are being conducted to this day, in my estimation. And anybody that thinks that, that actually stopped and, became, MK Search and therefore was no longer the pervasive thing that it was and went away just because Dick Helms told us so. You've got another thing coming. And,
I hear you. As someone pointed out in the chat, I actually forgot. But another thing I have is Conspiratees, which is a conspiracy-themed clothing brand. And I do have an MK Ultra shirt. It says MK Ultra made me do it. and it's got like a hypnotist spiral and a hypnotist watch, and it's got like some Twilight Zone type of font. It's a little campy, but I think that again is more approachable. It's just a more approachable way to bring it up. But I also think it's just a fun design. But yes, definitely a conspiracy staple is MK Ultra and Mind Control.
Conspiratees, it's called, huh?
Yes, like TEES,
Right.
as in T-shirts.
Right.
Which the links are all alongside with the Higher Side Chat stuff everywhere.
Just going to say, yeah, you can find all that stuff at actually thehighersidechat.com. Yeah, I did forget to mention the T-shirts, so
Cool.
Thanks for that. No, I'm just saying thanks to whoever it was that brought it up in the chat room, because I actually don't have it in front of me at this point, but do appreciate that, guys.
They're also telling you to quit smoking.
Yeah, I know, but they tell me a lot of things. A lot of the people that listen to me don't like me, so it's okay. Some of them would probably rather I kept smoking, and probably wished I smoked other things than what I do. So
Now they got vaping.
I know, but it just
Jury's out on that. I think
Yeah.
there are some studies that say it's worse. I think there's just this pattern of the, I guess the elite didn't bring us vaping, but big corporations putting out products, or these fads happen, and they're just kind of like, we'll just sell them the drugs, sell them the poison, and then we'll sort it out later. And I'd rather not participate in that more than I have to. Granted, I grew up in a poison world, and I have my addictions. I am addicted to television and movies, and I'm also addicted to caffeine. I cannot kick soda. I could give up alcohol faster than I could probably give up soda. And it's a terrible thing. We all have our weaknesses, and it's a tough machine to fight against. We can't all be perfect.
see, and I could scold you and tell you all about aspartame, and I could tell you all about the packaging and how that's damaging to you.
That's in the diet soda, which is actually worse than the regular soda.
Oh, but take a look at it, because they've renamed it, and now it's in a lot of the regular soda too. And then the packaging, the way that stuff leaches in there and becomes an estrogen mimicker, and screws around with. Yeah, see.
I can get Mexican Coke. I can get Mexican soda though that is cane sugar. But of course, there's also things that say that drinking soda or acidic beverages out of aluminum cans has been linked to Alzheimer's. So even if it is not the aspartame, it might just be the aluminum. We are in such a screwed position, my man.
Right.
Poisons are so everywhere, and everybody's trying to lie to us, and nobody cares. Like it's very, very upsetting that we just have so much gray area. Of course, there are people on one side of the fence that says everything's fine. There are other people on the other side of the fence that say everything is killing us every day. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, probably more towards the killing side. But just the fact that people think that there's not a huge debate is ridiculous. Like, come on. It's clearly the case that we are in a poison world, and we should do something about that. At least take small steps.
Right, and then we didn't even really touch upon, the nuclear agenda, as it were, and the ridiculousness of, where it is we have these power plants and Fukushima and the shape that's in, the damage that's causing to the planet as we speak, more than 3 years later. And not to mention, let's just forget about all that open air testing and all those other sorts of leaks and mishaps and misadventures and malfunctions we've had over the years. And meanwhile, we'll keep building these things on fault lines and coastlines, so they're plenty vulnerable and ready to go at any point in time. That's all good stuff too. Again, where does coincidence leave off? Right. But the whole thing has become extremely poisoned, and you're right. The most extreme naturalists out there, in some cases, I mean, they're friends of mine, and they make me a little crazy because, I don't know if I'm allowed to even take a breath, sometimes. But then again, it is much more foolish to simply assume that everything is just fine as well. And if you want to sleepwalk through life, I guess that's fine. And when you get run over by a bus, you won't notice. So it's all good, and like you said, the truth really does lay somewhere in between these two lines of thinking anyway, probably a lot closer to those paranoid natural people. But
and I have no problem with people doing things that are really damaging themselves, as long as they're only damaging themselves and not people around them. I just want everyone to have the right information. You know, if smoking cigarettes is dangerous at a 9 and drinking soda is dangerous at a 8, like I want the right scale. I want to know the truth, and then I will assess how long I want to live and how much I'm willing to take off my life with poison for the short-term enjoyment. I just want there to be honest assessment out there. I think everybody does things that they know aren't good for themselves, but they don't really know how bad, and so they're just like, screw it.
Yeah.
I know I enjoy the alcohol tonight. I can promise everybody that. So that's where I'm gonna leave my thoughts. You know, it's like, well, there's probably long-term effects that are pretty dangerous, but it's not quite as obvious as the enjoyment you're going to have in the short term. But it's just a shame that people don't acknowledge the lack of honesty in all these industries and call them out.
Well, and we also we talked about Tracy Twyman. We talked about Mike Rupert. Who were some of the other sort of really I don't know how to put it, like headline guests that you might say were, you know, sort of the highlights for the higher side chat? I mean, in general, just off the top of your head. And this is not necessarily a complete list, so nobody get offended. But
yeah, Jim Mars, of course, I was really happy to get. I love that guy. I think he's on the right track in a lot of areas. If you just want to get weird, David Politis with the missing 411 stuff. I love that. The people going missing in national parks under very strange circumstances. Just to name a few of those circumstances, kids are going missing. In some cases, are being found miles and miles away, or even you know, at a much higher elevation than they should be able to get. You know, a 2-year-old kid goes missing. The Park Service goes looking for him. 2 days later, he's found 9 miles away. Like, what? Just crazy stuff like that. Really, really odd. People are being found. They've taken off their clothes in some cases. Sometimes just a shoe is found. But there seems to be a situation where the Park Service is lying and covering up a lot of this data because they don't want people to be afraid of the parks. Or maybe they are the people who are put in place to monitor the parks so that the elite can get a certain number of people from a environment where they won't ever get caught. I haven't eliminated that possibility. So that was a good show. I really liked David Bloom. He talks about the alcohol conspiracy, the idea that we all know that prohibition happened, and I never really got why. I thought, well, is this like the one time where like some really conservative people just got something through and they made alcohol legal? No, it had to do with alcohol as a fuel. Rockefeller was behind it, of course. And it's just like the marijuana thing. The reason why marijuana was made illegal is because the textile industry and the textile lobbies, it was going to hurt their business because they had other things that they used versus hemp. So that got eliminated, and marijuana came along with that. And this prohibition was the same thing. They tried to take away alcohol because they wanted to get rid of it as a fuel. They didn't give a shit if you consume it. They don't care about your health. Right. But they had to lie. And so then they made it illegal for 10 years. And then, of course, 10 years later, people wanted to drink again, but everybody forgot that it was used as a fuel. And now today we're still barely trying to get that information out with ethanol and shit like that. So I thought that was really eye-opening. John Rappaport's great. He talks about the medical conspiracies and vaccines. I think he has a great approach to that. Daniele Bolelli is an author and a comedian, I guess, of sorts. He pals around with comedians, but he's a Taoist, a martial arts teacher. He's pretty awesome. We did a show about Taoist philosophy and rejecting dogma and taking the warrior's path. Done a lot of shows on magic. I had Carrie Cassidy on the show, which was kind of interesting. She's a bit of a legend with Project Camelot. I think she could benefit from some more discernment with some of her interviews, but still fascinating. Gordon White, he's a guy who talked about Gnosticism and parapolitics and chaos magic. I think he's a great author. Tons of them, man. Every week, I think, like I said, I consider myself more of a talent scout than anything else, than a researcher or whatever. I'm out there finding the best guests that I think I can put up on the THC stage and let them present something interesting. So I think that my roster is pretty strong if I was to be honest. But, that's not because of me. It's just because there's great people out there that I happen to find.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I totally understand that. I mean, that's kind of what I'm doing with this show. Is most of the time I try and bring on, the most interesting people that I have some sort of agreement with. Generally speaking, I don't intentionally bring on people that I disagree with, but
Well, I appreciate being in that club.
that may change. That may change soon because I think that people might benefit from the disagreements on occasion too. Because I'm much about the exploration of these things. Sort of lifting the veil and trying to get around, all of the nonsense that we've sort of been taught over time. The general consensus of knowledge is not really the general consensus of knowledge. It's just simply what's been rammed down our throats, and our history has been greatly redacted and stolen from us in a lot of ways. And I think that in the current atmosphere, the way things are, the kind of thing that you're doing is a way of putting things on the record and disseminating information that you're not going to get from the Coast to Coast AM. You're not going to get from Mr. Conservative talk show guy, fill in the blank. You're not going to get from token liberal that they let on the air for 2 hours a day at a particular talk station. You're not going to get on television. You're not going to get it anywhere else except through one of these sort of uniquely kind of constructed visions from somebody like yourself. And I do appreciate the fact that you go into all these subjects. And yeah, these were all great shows. I really did like the one where you guys started discussing chaos magic, because that's a terminology that's brought up by some people and they don't really understand what it is to begin with. And of course, when people start discussing, ritualized behaviors and things that are, in the esoteric vein, a lot of people shy away from it because, it becomes immediately repulsive to those that are very much married to the religious dogma, whatever it may be,
Yeah. I've taken a lot of slack for going into the magic topics in a positive way. A lot of people are some people are afraid of that, and they think that you shouldn't be messing with it, period. And I didn't expect to go quite down that road as much as I have. And it's a tricky type of thing to talk about sometimes. The language can be very slippery. But I find it fascinating. And I think that now there's been enough great guests in that realm to say it is like a THC staple topic. But there are a lot of people who think it's just dark and should be avoided. But I don't think anything should be avoided. I think that's too simplistic. I think everything should be explored. And then things that have no positive value should be discarded. But I think everything should be explored. And I think thinking otherwise is just too simplistic and too convenient for the people who want to operate in the shadows.
No, absolutely. I'll tell you what, we're down to the last 2.5 minutes, I think, here. And I want to thank you very much for coming on with me, because you had no idea what you were stepping into. And I really appreciate it. And
thank you, man. I appreciate you having me. I mean, it's an honor.
Well, thanks a lot, man. I can't tell people enough. They need to go to thehighersidechat.com. Check out, the free stuff. If you, value for value, if you think it's worth your subscription cost, go right ahead, do that. Get the T-shirt, get everything over there. I think that Greg's doing a really interesting piece of work over there that you're not going to get everywhere else. So definitely check that out. And I wonder if you have any sort of like closing final thoughts, as it were, for the listener out there in general, before my obnoxious bumper kicks in. Go right ahead.
Well, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you having me on. You're doing just as good a work as I am. I mean, clearly. I think that, again, the prevailing thing that we got across is that, yes, there's a lot of negative stuff going on at the top, behind the scenes, in the shadows, but how much of that is really affecting you as opposed to the debt you may be in, maybe being with the wrong partner, having the wrong job, the things that are really in your sphere of influence, you can make those things a lot better. And when you do, those other things, you start to be like, yeah, how much influence do chemtrails really have on my life? Of course, I might die of cancer at 40. Who knows? I might die super young of cancer that I got from chemtrails. But right now, I think that these things are definitely interesting, and they definitely need to be looked at, and they're very dark. But I also think, on the flip side, people need to look at their own lives and improve it for themselves.
Right. So, as usual, like I like to tell everybody, always try and get your own house in order before you start casting all those wonderful stones at other people's glass houses. It's a good thing to try and, get yourself prepared for what's coming next, and be informed, be aware. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Ochelli Effect tonight before the obnoxious bumper kicks me off. Thanks a lot, Greg.
And thanks for the chat, people. I've been watching.
Right.
Webcam microphone up close. Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a.
See, but I have the files. I read this
Really?
stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things.
I said to
all
myself,
these
any of that
books,
guy
and how can that
reminds
be
me
possible?
of the brain?
Pistols and fondle slab of choice. I don't know what that was. It doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from, as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information because